Well, friends, thank you for joining us for today's conversation with the clerk. We're talking today about the new Presbytery manual, and I sent you all a copy of this yesterday, and it was in the Presbytery packet. And Mary and Cecilia Taylor and Nicole Locke and I have been working for a little over a year, I think, to take a look at the manual and see what we might be able to do to bring it a little further closer to what we are doing in the Presbytery. Um, so the council charged us with that project, and we have had, I would say, we've had a little bit of fun while doing it. It's been a lot of writing. And I will also confess that I have been involved in rewriting the standing rules of the General Assembly and this manual of the Synod around the same time. So it's entirely possible that I may say something that applies to one of those other manuals rather than the Presbytery manual. So apologies in advance because I'm trying to juggle three manuals that are in rewrites at the same time. But want to start the conversation, and feel free to interrupt us at any point in time. But I want to start the conversation with a couple questions with Mary, and uh, so, and I'll answer some of these as well. But so, Mary, what as we were working on this, what would you say was the biggest surprise that came to you as we worked on on revising the manual?
I don't know if I really would call it a surprise as much as just an affirmation and a reminder that sometimes when we rewrite something that maybe the team thinks is just a small administrative change or just to clean up the language to get closer to the Book of Order or something like that, that the constituents of that change may take it very differently than our intent was. And we had several things along the way that ended up being a bigger deal to one group or another, a committee or another, than maybe we had envisioned.
Mm. And our other conversant, he just popped in. I see Reverend Dr. Cecilia Taylor. I'm going to invite her. We just got to our first question. Cecilia, what was the biggest surprise for you as we worked on revising the manual? We can, I think we can see you, but not, hear you, but not see you yet. But we're not actually hearing you. There you are.
I'm sorry, is that me?
No,
Okay.
there you go. There you go. Yeah.
Hey.
So, yeah. So, what was the biggest surprise for you as we worked on revising the manual?
Oh, okay. My biggest surprise was I'm sorry, just I'm a little here we go. My biggest surprise was um how well I'm again I'm sorry for being a little bit photo just popped out of another meeting. Um the flow, how we were able to take something that was very large and make it more accessible.
Hmm.
And accessible is the word. And again, and and also being able to give reference points to um, our book of order, noting how things have changed. And that was a surprise how much things changed but
Hmm.
remained the same,
Hmm.
because the core is still there, but but what changed?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and that's a good lead into our next question, which is, what are the for each of you as you worked on this, and I'll answer this one too. What do you think are the two most important changes in the new manual that people need to know about?
I can go ahead with that one, Andy.
Mhm.
I would say the definition of committees and commissions we spent a lot of time at the beginning looking at all the entities of the Presbytery and how it operates, looking at their roles and responsibilities and what they actually had in our minds and in our practice more authority over, but we probably weren't, had not officially given them that authority, which a commission would have. So reconstituting some of our committees, traditional committees like operations, to be a commission. Committee on Ministry, which just rolls off of our tongues, COM, but they certainly have more commission authority. So some of those were important, I think, for the Presbytery. And I know this will get into what does it mean for the churches, but I think it applies to churches in thinking about what do your committees have authority to do on their own, and what needs to go to the session and getting that documented, even if we don't use the commission language in churches generally.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I would say the biggest important change, and Cecilia alluded to this, is just simplifying the descriptions, cleaning up different sections, trying to reduce duplication. And even in some cases, we found contradiction. And so to get all that cleaned up and just try to say things once. And so then if it does come for a change later, we don't have to catch every place that change would be.
Right.
Those are the ones for me.
Yeah. Cecilia, what would you say are the biggest changes you noticed?
Yeah, I'm echoing what Mary said, but also just the mere size. If nothing else, the size of the document, removing all, and we just had so much wording that was old or unnecessary. And you know, and again, just catching up to where we are. And I would say, and again, echoing what Mary says, and I've experienced this already in my setting. It's amazing how many churches don't have this kind of resource. So in this setting, it has provided us with a template of what to do to make the committee work in this church more efficient, and for people to be a lot clearer about how each committee or clearer on the polity of the church and the connectional nature to the Presbytery and the larger church.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Great insight. Well, I'll tell y'all, I mean, I think to echo a little bit of Mary and Cecilia, the clarification about commission authority is a big deal to me. When we look across the broader church, I was reflecting with a colleague or someone recently. If you look at the cases considered by the General Assembly Permanent Judicial Commission over the last few years, such a great majority of them, or maybe at least a good third of them, let me put it like that, have something to do with commissions. And this sense of what authority did the commission have to do what it did? And at what time was it given? Was it given in the right way? How was it applied, et cetera, et cetera. And so to try to give us greater clarity about what a commission is I think one of the most important things we're doing in the new manual. It also means with that there will be less kind of routine motions at Presbytery meetings, because the routine is that the work is happening and we just receive it. We receive it and put it in our minutes. We don't vote on it. If you look at the omnibus motion at most of our stated meetings, it includes these admit to record items from different committees. And that's just the way that we make those official. And when we call those committees commissions, we don't have to have a motion to make it official. We don't have to receive their work. It is just done. It appears in our minutes. The reports will be formatted a little bit differently. It won't be an admit to record section. It will be actions taken as commission on behalf of the presbytery, or some, I haven't figured out the exact language, but something like that. So that'll be a bit of a shift in that little piece, because we're changing what it means from a committee to a commission. And the other one that I actually encouraged and maybe even pushed for is a shift, and but is very important as well, is a shift related to the timing of Presbyterian meeting materials. So the new manual proposes that we go from a 2-week, 14-day notice for all the meeting materials down to 10 days. That 2-week notice was set up, obviously, in a day when packets were being mailed and had to get out to churches and people and that sort of thing. We're not operating that way anymore. So now we can send electronic notice and people immediately have access to all the materials. We don't have to wait on the mail. We don't have to wait on 2 people to get it to where it needs to go. It can be pretty much direct. So, so I hope that will be a streamlining piece. It certainly is going to mean that some of the materials that get put out to meetings, 4 days sounds like not very much, but it means that our committees and commissions can be more current in what they share and report to the whole presbytery. It does also mean, I think, that sessions are going to have to make sure they know who their commissioners are and get them registered before all of the materials are ready for the meeting. So we're going to be changing our communication strategy a little bit as a presbytery, just to make sure that people are not waiting on that final, here's all the materials you need for the meeting, to figure out who their commissioner is going to be from a particular session. Because I've seen that pattern a couple of times. So I think I'm hopeful about that. I think it'll be a good thing for us. So Mary and Cecilia, do you see any big changes in how the presbytery operates if the new manual is approved and implemented?
I think we've both already alluded to the fact that we wrote down officially really what was already happening in practice in many cases. And we had practices had evolved. And so we just wanted to get that documented. So I'm not sure. I don't think so. That, there's some minor changes like that, like you talk about I mean, I guess minor to me, it may not be minor to you, but some things like that that could impact what we see, for example, on the docket and so forth. But I really think most of it, our committees and those working at the working level won't see a big change.
Mm-hmm. Cecilia?
I think probably the biggest change that I would see would be a working document that's in the hands of members of the presbytery that will answer questions quickly and lessen the necessity of actually giving you a call. It removes a lot of the legalese that we've gone through. It doesn't mean that you probably won't be getting a call for an interpretation, but I think it's just clearer, and that's huge.
Andy, I did think of one other thing, and that is, and I think seeing Mary Evans on this call is planting this seed in my mind, because I know she has been involved in the nominating process, but we had quite a bit of debate about what to put in each committee and commission section, because those had traditionally been used as the job description that was sent to prospective elders and ministers to serve on committees and commissions. And I think it will mean that some of that common language that we put in a separate section that applies to all committees and commissions, or most, is going to have to be then merged with the job description of a particular committee or commission. And so that will be, I think, a change for nominating to work in that one.
I think that's a good point. I will say, I joke about it at some level, but it is complicated. The former manual when we had a page for each committee, it would talk about what the quorum is, how the chair gets appointed, etc. There were enough differences that I had to create a reference chart for all of the committees on questions of how does the chair get appointed? How many members are there? How many members does it take to have a quorum? We actually, I think, currently have 4 different quorums for our committees, a mix of a majority of the members, half of the members, more than half of the members, which is still the same as a majority, and 50% plus 1 of the members. And if you ever are involved in writing a document like this, do not use the term 50% plus 1, because it is not going to help you in any way. If you have a committee of 13, a quorum of 50% plus 1 is 8, not 7. So because 50% of 13 is 6.5. So you have to use that and then add and then round up. So those are some of the kind of things. For some committees, that will be for that committee that had 50% plus 1, that will be a big change. If they have an odd number of people, they will need one less person to have a quorum. So, yeah. I mean, we've alluded to some of this, and this is, some of you have said this is why you're on this call. What can our sessions and congregations learn from this process? What are the takeaways that you all have for them in this? I mean, and to be clear, like, part of why we have this manual is as an example, and part of why we're doing this call is to say, okay, call one of us and we're happy to help you with this. But it's my job to help sessions with these sorts of things. But what are the big takeaways that apply to the work in a local church coming out of this process?
I want to just say something about that in regard to the work that we did and do. I think that sometimes what happens with our churches is that for various reasons, sometimes it's mostly, I don't know, it could be church culture, it could be organizational, it could be financial, but sometimes we lose our connectedness, and then we get lost in how to organize and govern ourselves, even though the information is just simply a part of who we are. And it always amazes me how many churches don't have a manual like this, or a way to, once they get into a little difficulty, it's not, well, let's call Presbytery to see, what we need to do. Whereas the information is generally just right there for you, like in the Book of Order. And that's one of the things that the manual does. It gives you a roadmap, so to speak, to finding out what you need that's really concise and sweet, direct to the point. And if you don't need it, then, if it doesn't answer your question, you can always go to and James, who will flesh it out for you just a little bit more. But just putting this out there and hopefully having churches say, let's do something like this for ourselves, that will make the work in the church simpler. Mm-hmm. But again, it brings us back to our connected nature, that individual churches, when they reach a point of having to do this, they're not having to go out and reinvent the wheel. The Presbytery has already set forth a blue plate or a template for it. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Mary.
Well, I've already mentioned about same thing Cecilia's talking about the churches, and certainly my own, looking at our documents and seeing what we have, what is outdated, what needs to be updated, and so forth. And then that it's widely understood what the manual or the documents, bylaws, or whatever say. I think two cautionary things that we kind of learned through the process are don't try to write down everything. Not everything that the church is doing or will ever do or has ever done belongs in the manual. It's intended to provide lanes, so to speak, to stay in the lane, but it cannot and should not try to describe every road hazard. We often have that with personnel manuals, I think, also, where if something ever happened in the church, we got to put it in the personnel manual. And we all know that the next time that a similar situation occurs, it will be different enough that we don't want to hem ourselves in too much. So that would be, I would say, but simplifying probably what our churches have and updating it. This should be a great tool to use as a template.
Yeah, I think this. I'll reflect to say I think the table of contents alone could be really helpful for a lot of churches. I will say I think that there is a little bit of a difference sometimes in how churches and the Presbytery look at the manual. I have, and I'll confess to being a part of this. I don't believe this is confusing. I think it's just reality. In the local church, particularly the local church of a smaller size. When I say smaller, probably 300-ish members or less. The manual in many ways is better seen as almost like a loose leaf notebook where you're collecting the things you're doing and collecting your policies and procedures so that they're all in one place. And when you get a new clerk, you can hand that over, or a new pastor, you can say, here's how we function and operate, not just about how the session committees are structured, but maybe here's the instructions, maybe not so detailed on how to unlock the door, but some of the processes on some of the more complex things like that maybe need to be just gathered in one place. And I think that is a distinction sometimes between a church manual of operations and a Presbytery manual of operations, where the Presbytery's manual really is kind of like the bylaws of the Presbytery. It's going to have the structures written down in some clear ways, which is what the goal of this project has been, to clearly define our structures, what they do, what they don't do, what belongs to all of us, what belongs to smaller groups of us on behalf of the whole. So, and I think that, to me, having gone through now 3 processes related to manuals, bylaws, standing rules kinds of things, that process is of kind of assessing who we are, how we do it, and how we want to be, is the most important part of doing this work. It's not the written document that's on the outcome of it, but it's about how we get there. So, last question for the two of you, and then we'll open up to other questions. So be thinking about things. Where do you think the manual might need some work in the future? I'll point out that we know that there are 2 sections that are blank and are probably going to stay that way even as we put it forward in November, just because we haven't had the time and space to finish the work with ECCAM to come up with that section, and to kind of sketch out Presbytery staff in a helpful way in the manual. So we're probably just going to say that those are remaining in progress. And maybe that's a good mark of this is not a done project. It always needs to be, it needs some attention. But Mary, Cecilia, are there other things y'all see us wanting to spend some time on?
Actually, that's exactly where I was going.
I had also noted, yeah, go.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I had noted, that we need to recognize that, especially when it comes to organization, when we're talking positions, even some of the committees that we have, uh, that it's going to be a fluid document, that we we're going to change.
Mhm.
It's who we are. We're reformed. We're always changing. Um, and as long as we keep that in mind, that structurally, foundationally, as you said, our basic bylaws are going to be pretty solid. But when it comes to some of our committees, probably not as much with the commissions, but definitely with some of our committees, there's going to be some changes.
Mhm. Yeah, Mary, what about you?
I had noted those same things with ECCAM, the Coalition of Korean Churches, and also staff. I think on staff, there is a very robust personnel manual, and that is the policies and procedures for staff procedures, the hiring and the compensation, benefits, and so forth. That we not repeat that in this Presbytery manual. And then there's certainly more work to be done with NCDC. Not so much, some related to the manual. I think that will drive the manual is just the overall relationship with the new Church Development Commission and its financials and so forth. That will probably drive some changes.
Yeah. Well, and that Mary, you're a part, both Mary and Cecilia are part of a process that is trying to look broadly at the mission and ministry of the Presbytery with a focus on financial sustainability in the long term to drive some of those conversations. And I think that's a really good point it's really kind of funny that at the beginning of that process, we're about to approve a manual versus often that's done at the end. And yet, I think it actually sometimes is really good to make sure that you have a clear statement of where we are before we try to make some big shifts. So, the PSA, if you're not aware, it was mentioned at the stated meeting last month, but the November stated meeting at Mount Vernon will include a time talking about mission and missional alignment across the Presbytery and all of its entities. So there'll be a good time of conversation around that, and we really hope to have as many of you as and from our congregations there as we can to be a part of that. So, Mary, Cecilia, thank you for your initial insights. Want to open the floor for other questions? So yeah, unmute yourself and speak up.
So Andy, I haven't had a chance to read the manual thoroughly, but looking at the revision history, so let's say there are some minor changes on this manual from the one that was published in the summer meeting. So what are those? And then the previous revisions and such. I think if we have that revision history section, that will help a lot. The second, once this is approved in November meeting, do you think this will be available in the other ethnic languages?
Those are two great questions. So in terms of availability in other languages, we have not discussed making that available yet, but we can certainly look into that and would probably look to machine translation to start and then and then maybe have somebody look over it and help fix the places where it's out of alignment. That's increasingly, I've worked some with the national church on translation issues, and I think that's the strategy they primarily use nowadays. But can certainly look into that. And this might be a really good first step. That's not been part of our history as a presbytery, but we do have congregations for whom their first language is Korean or Spanish. And this might be a good first step toward providing some of those materials in that way. In terms, thanks for the reminder. Yeah. We may, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Whenever the presbytery new revised the book of orders for the New Year's, it's always available in Korean language, so that really helps a lot.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So to your question on the revision history, I did not make a specific one. The only revisions that I've made were actually in response to one email from someone who's not with us today, but there were a couple of little errors in terms of the number. There was a discrepancy in the number of people on the Committee on Representation. The manual was saying 9. It's actually its current membership is 6. So that was one change that was made. Another change that I made, I actually need to talk to Mary and Cecilia a little bit about, is to move away from the term co-opted members of committees. It's a little confusing. What does that mean? To advisory members of committees and commissions. And that's a little bit clearer that an advisory member is someone who the committee says, we need them to advise us on something. And we want them to work with us for the next year or two on that. And it didn't change any of the provisions related to that. It just said they have, that was the term. And we use that term with this. This is one of those moments where I've been working on a synod manual. We use that term. We came up with that term there, and I was like, this is a really good term. Let's borrow it. So that's, I think those are the revisions. Mary, Cecilia, do you recall anything else that we have changed? Mary, I saw that email the last day or two on that. Okay. Thank you, David. Great questions.
Thank you.
Any other questions from folks? Comments are welcome too.
I would commend the committee that has done this work. I think it is, for the most part, tremendous. I would hope that the churches would benefit from it. I have a couple of questions. One relates to the synod. I see the synod mentioned in 521H, but I never see where any relationship or reference to the synod is included in the manual. Is there to be a heading that says this is the Presbytery and a part of the synod and a part of the Presbyterian Church USA?
That is a great question. So it does say so a couple of places where that lines up. In section 2, the membership, the Presbytery, talking about the membership of the Presbytery, talks about how the Presbytery is composed of the congregations and ministers within the district as defined by the General Assembly. So that is connecting us to the Presbyterian Church USA, but we didn't mention that we're part of the synod there. Maybe a place we could easily add it. There is also mention in section 6.1, or section 6 is about relationships with synod and General Assembly. This mainly talks about the election of commissioners. But there is also, that is just 6.1, there could be an additional section. Maybe that's a place in the future where we talk more about that as it emerges.
The other thing that arises in my mind is that we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and I see no provisions for the materials of the Presbytery to be retained elsewhere. I know electronically that is different from what it was in 2020 when we were first working on that. But I do think it is a good reminder, if churches are going to use this as a guideline, that we have some reference to protecting the history, the materials of the congregation, the presbytery, and so forth, off-site in case of an emergency situation?
That's a really good question. I think so some of that is required by the Book of Order, and that very much functions under my job. So you're making me go, did I miss something about my job that needs to be put in here? And I may have. We do talk about in 5.1.10, the each committee maintains minutes. The stated clerk ensures that each committee or commission has provision for proper long-term electronic storage. The full minutes of all commissions for a calendar year are also included in the bound edition of the Presbytery's minutes to ensure that a complete historical record of actions taken on behalf of the Presbytery is available. So some of that is happening there. But there is a responsibility of the clerk to make recommendations to the body. Our permanent records are stored at Columbia Seminary in the archives. So it may be appropriate to as we look at this, I'll go back and see maybe in the stated clerk section or something like that to indicate that the clerk is responsible on behalf of the Presbytery for maintaining the records in a secure and archival format. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Other questions you all have?
I'll go ahead and speak up here. As speaking from the church viewpoint, I will commend you on the condensation of your manual. It's very concise. Mine is not. Mine is very thick. A lot of that has to do with, we had a lot of policies that were just out there and no one place where they were kept. So we included that in part of our manual. And I think one of the most frustrating things for me is as soon as it's approved, something has changed. And so then we have to go back and we hold on to those. We only update it once a year, formally anyway. But I loved what you were talking about, how you will have a manual and now people can use that instead of calling Andy all the time. I want to know how you make that happen because that has not happened for me.
I think the hope and prayer is that as we finalize this, and then we make it available on the website, and we work, as David suggested, getting it translated into Korean and Spanish. We broaden out the access to it. It's very much part of my philosophy as clerk is why call the clerk when you can find the answer yourself. I would love at one level to work myself out of the job. So to make sure that things are organized and orderly, readable, understandable, and they just make sense. So that's been part of our goal on this work. Cecilia, Mary, anything y'all want to add on that?
I say that I do think it's a little tricky about those policies and what to put in the manual and what to have as a standalone policy, or do you reference the policies in the manual, like that the church will have a policy has policies on blah, 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 and blah, but the policies themselves are not in the manual, but then is it single stop shopping? But if you make one change in a policy, do you have to update then the whole manual? And anyway, I think that's a little tricky. We did have one question from someone about why don't I see, and now I can't remember what policy it was, but this policy in the manual. And Andy, you may want to speak to that. We did not go put policies in the manual.
Right. We did try to say, okay, if we know we need a policy on something, we put it there and we assign it to a committee as their responsibility to maybe not maintain it on behalf of the presbytery, but at least be aware of it and bring it for action to the presbytery. So, like, for example, the required anti-racism policy is assigned to the Racial Healing Committee as their policy to steward. And so they bring the proposals for that to the presbytery. But yeah, but Annette, what you're describing actually works really well in a small in a local church because it puts everything in one place. As I was saying earlier, like I think of the operations manual in the local church as a loose leaf binder. I remember a church. The extreme might be the local church that dissolved that in my previous presbytery, where the clerk and committees and clerk and session more broadly had prepared a manual of operations. It was really kind of like how to operate the church building. So here's how to change over from heat to AC. That probably does not belong in your manual of operations. Maybe it belongs in your building manual of operations. It needs to be written down somewhere. But there's an art to figuring out where that belongs, and it will vary from church to church, from presbytery to church, presbytery to synod, etc. Other questions folks have?
I don't have a question, Andy. I didn't get the manual that you sent out.
Okay, I can resend it to you. It was in the handbook for the last stated meeting as well, with just I mentioned a couple of little changes. They truly are almost very minor. And then we will be sure to note when we present this in November, we'll be sure to note what we changed between what was put out in August and what is being put up for a vote. Because it's our hope that we'll bring this up. One other thing that comes to mind with Annette's comments is another consideration as to what you put in your manual. What is your what are the requirements for how it gets changed? Can your in some session manuals, it makes perfect sense that you change the manual just by a majority vote. Versus with the Presbytery manual, it takes a 2/3 vote with previous notice. So it's got to be in the the proposed change has to be in the handbook before somebody just can't stand up on the floor of a meeting and say, I move we change COM from 21 members to 12 members. We're not going to function that way. We've got to have that. We got to have a little more notice and a higher level of attention. So that's something to take into account as you're considering what goes in the manual and what doesn't. But yeah, Laverne, we'll make sure you get a copy of it for sure.
All right.
Any other comments or questions? Parting thoughts from Mary or Cecilia? David, I see you unmuting.
So it's not related with today's topic, but the other day I read an article that since the current the weather eco environment is changing rapidly, and I saw that there is the pastor or the consulting people who have worries about the eco change, environment changes, and that position called as a eco chaplain. So in the PCUSA, do we have that position or positions?
We do have a number of positions, mostly from the national church, taken by the General Assembly over the years. I think the next conversations with the clerk is talking about some of the General Assembly actions, and we'll talk some more about what the General Assembly has acted on related to climate change. We have a long history of speaking about it. We have engaged with a number of corporations with where we hold stock in them through the Board of Pensions and the Presbyterian Foundation, to say, how can we encourage you to at least take into account the fact that climate is changing in your corporate decision making. And in a couple of very limited circumstances, we have divested our funds when they have refused to continue speaking with us, or they've said, we don't care what you have to say. So I think that's one of the ways we've done some of that. And we're looking at others, but yeah, we have a number of statements about attention to the climate crisis and that come out of General Assembly. And I'll be more prepared to answer that question on the next call. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Other particular or general comments or questions on this?
This is Betty Dora. I am concerned. I've been following a little bit about the commission at the General Assembly level, and I'm concerned about that. And I know there's very little they want to do, but the same thing is happening, perhaps in this presbytery, in a more diluted form. And I certainly hope that you keep that in mind, and also keep in mind. And, I'm not active, but I'm more active than many in terms of my understanding and in terms of my ability to get the information that I need. But we don't get much information from this presbytery. And so, and there are some entities within this presbytery that have even less and care even less. And I just hope that we eventually do something about that, or work on that.
Well, thank you for raising that question and concern, Betty. I think what I will share is, number one, hopefully this manual is a step in the direction of that, by trying to be transparent and consistent and increase the level of communication. As the manual as we have it isn't anywhere on the website, for example. That was before my time. I tried to put it there, and then when I put it together, it was kind of like, this is not all of it, or it's more confusing for me to give you this than not. So one of the first things that will happen after this is approved, if it is approved, will be to make sure that this gets put on the website so that it will be made available very broadly. And I take your concern about the Unification Commission at the national level, and trying to make sure that we don't duplicate that unintentionally in the presbytery. We do have a process that's ongoing related to, we call it the Unified Conversations. It is not, it is trying to bring all the parties to the table. And that group does not have authority to make changes without the presbytery knowing about it and voting on it. So I think that will be, so I hope and pray that there won't be any additional concern on that, but and that will continue to increase the level of communication that's out there. And if at any time folks have questions about what's going on in a particular area, people should always feel free to reach out to me, and I will do my best to respond. Or if I don't know the answer, and even sometimes if I do, I'll make sure you get to the person who can give you a better answer. I view that as a very important part of my job, is knowing who has the answers to the questions that people might ask. So, and helping people get connected to those. So, yeah, so I hope that's a helpful statement for you, Betty.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Well, friends, I want to thank you again for joining us for today's Conversations with the Clerk. I am deeply grateful for you taking the time out in the middle of a random September Wednesday and joining us for lunch, or whatever this time might have been for you. I appreciate your being here. You can always reach out to me via email if you have other questions. I'm at cajames at atlpcusa.org, and happy to respond to any questions on the manual or other things along the way. As we close, let me offer a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for this time together, for your faithful servants who have gathered to do your work and to hear more about how you are shaping us and forming us as the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta. We ask your continued blessing upon this presbytery and our congregations and new worshiping communities and ministers and all who bear witness to your love through this unique and amazing institution that you have created. Go with us as this day goes on. Help us to serve you faithfully today and always. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, friends. Hope to see you again soon.